Welcome to Edocio version 0.4.0. This is an educational software serving system that serves textbook content using the Edocio system. The Edocio system essentially displays a page of text to the learner, and then when the person learning has read the page completely, they're given 5 sentences from the textbook, and they're required to select from those 5 sentences the one sentence that was in the page they just got done reading. So if they're paying attention to what they're reading and reading every sentence, it's easy. If you're a skimmer who programmed your brain to skip over stuff and not really read, it could be a problem because you really do have to be able to pick out the sentence. And the sentence being offered could be any sentence, not necessarily the most important one or the first sentence or anything. So that's the way the Edocio works. If you're successful, you get to read the next page, and when you're done with that and you're ready to continue, you get to pick a sentence again. All right? And then if you are unsuccessful and click the wrong one, you get sent back to the beginning or some distance back in the reading so that you get to do some pages over again. It's kind of your punishment, so to speak. And so you learn to pay attention and actually read all the content. The first version of this software was written on the IBM PC using a copy of DBase 2, and I wrote it in the computer laboratory of Evangel College in Springfield, Missouri, and it had to have been early in the 1980s. After I left Evangel College, I've rewritten this software a number of times on a number of different platforms, and eventually had converted something called OpenExpert to use for this around 2008, which provided a web-based course serving rather than having to run a program on your computer. And that system, due to changes in PHP, MySQLi, and stuff, it no longer runs on a modern server, and so this is my replacement for it. This software is much easier to use, much more straightforward, and I'm writing a textbook parser so that basically you just feed the textbook and it automatically parses it for you, and we should be able to generate several thousand different courses, different textbook content sets for it, at least with the open source or free or Creative Commons textbooks that are available. And we should be able to adopt this to work with commercial textbooks if it's protected in some way, so that only people that are paid for the textbook would get to read it. But this is extremely simple software. The learner doesn't log in and doesn't sign up for anything. You can go to freeopenuniversity.org and instantly go through this particular textbook. Now it's still under development, and the Edocio portion doesn't work. So if you want to read this textbook online, just always click the third thing. And the sentences are always the same, and they're not the right sentences, but don't worry about it. Just always click the third one, and it will keep letting you go forward for right now. When I get it done, I will have a sentence from each page in there, but I'm working on that parsing portion right now. It'll also shuffle the answers so that if you go back, the answers aren't in the same order and not necessarily the same sentences being offered. So that it's a little bit more difficult to cheat, or for several people sitting in the same room together, they can't give each other the answers, tell each other which one to click, because that won't work. When you reach the end, there's a code number that it gives you right here that's unique and it's generated when you connect to the web server, and it's unique for you. You have to save that. If you don't save that, you don't get credit for anything. And then when you've completed the entire textbook or the section of the textbook, usually these, since they have to be completed in one sitting, we tend to not go more than about 30 pages. I believe on this particular module it's 13 pages. So 13 to 20 pages is probably typical. And once you reach the end, you're given another code number. Now the page will make this pretty and you can click to copy it or whatever, but basically you need both of these code numbers. You need both of these numbers, and you want to remember things like what internet connection device you are using and all that, because you have to have both of these code numbers and some information, and that way they can match you up and verify that it's you. And in that system, they'll give you a certification for your learning. You don't, the software itself does nothing but gives you the codes. You have to go to your professor or to however you're learning. If you're a Free Open University member, you would actually send those codes to me, and then you'd have to verify your identity to me and demonstrate that you actually read the textbook, and we give you certification for the content. There's a lot of discussion about what real education is, and if you carefully Google search for anything that you see that you don't understand, and make sure that you don't go forward through the textbook until you know you understand what's being said, then you should be able to get a pretty good education without necessarily having to have a professor guide you. But if you are working in conjunction with the university, they'll generally have qualified professors to help you if you have questions. If you're doing independent study through either collegiate independent study or Free Open University, then you don't have that, and you'll have to work a little harder and make sure that you get your information right. So the software is not available for download, but the good news is, as long as your content is available to the world, in other words, it's not licensed content or copyrighted textbooks, I'll host it for you for free, and I can do several thousand courses, and you can have up to about 10,000 learners on it at a time, not a problem, and I will cover that cost to the not-for-profit organization. Will provide that for you free of charge. It's possible to run it within your campus, within your local network, but since it doesn't collect any information from your learners at all, essentially all it does is give them a code that you can use to verify. And I'll have a site where you can go and verify your learners' codes. There isn't a security issue at all, because it doesn't collect anything. It doesn't collect any information. And there's a possibility of people maybe passing their code around, or somebody going in and getting codes for somebody else. And you have to make sure that the person you're talking to actually read the textbook. When I set you up, I'll show you how easy it is to determine that somebody's trying to cheat. I have a number of cheating detections on here that eliminate the possibility of somebody makes it extremely difficult. It's the easiest way to complete an Edocio is to actually read the book, to actually read the page, and not try to fake it or have somebody else go through it for you, because I will talk to you about the Ionian Greeks and present-day Turkey, and you won't know what I'm talking about. Every one of these textbooks has unique things about them that you would definitely remember. For instance, the page we're looking at right now has a sentence that says, it talks about the culture that developed jet planes, atomic bombs, democracy, and a rational God. Well, if that sentence doesn't upset you on some level, then you're probably brain dead. Okay, and so we make sure that each textbook has memorable stuff, or maybe even statements that are entirely debatable, or maybe even flat out wrong, and somebody has to come back and go, wait a second, that couldn't be true, and then you go, okay, well, you definitely read that textbook then. But if you didn't see a question, a statement in there that bothered you, you probably didn't read it. And so this system is extremely low overhead. It can run on any web server with basic PHP, no plugins or add-ons. The web server does not have to support posts, because nothing is ever submitted. The only communications you have with the server is clicking to continue and then selecting the sentence that matches. And that's all done with basic link clicking. The key, it uses no cookies, but it does use the session state to create this unique number for you. And then it does a random string compression of some information for the key that it gives you, which we can uncompress or uncode to see certain information that's actually carried in the completion tag. For instance, how long you took to complete the textbook, or that section of the textbook, things like that. So even the key itself will give you away if you're cheating, if you're trying to cheat, and so it's a pretty good system. When I host it behind. I have a bunch of servers. Sometimes I'll use a BeagleBone or low power Atom servers. They may run thousands of Edocios under virtual hosts or whatever, but they all run in a private network, and your connection to them is going through something called Pound, and the Pound is compiled without the ability to pass posts through it. And so essentially, on any one of these things, the only communications you ever have with the server is going to the index, Free Open University index for the course, hitting the start button, which launches a URL, hitting the continue button, and then 5 possible buttons. The reset button actually sends you right back to the page, but tells it to forget what page you're on and start you at the beginning, and these 5 here. So basically there's like 7 URLs that can be passed to the server. The front end gateway won't pass anything but those exact URLs onto the server. There can be no post or anything. So if you want to try to hack it, you're trying to hack the Pound server that's in front of it. You're not actually even trying to hack the Edocio server. The Edocio server will never see anything except those 7 URLs that will be chopped to only be those 7 URLs. So let's just say it has an extremely small attack surface. It's part of the unhackable system, and since it doesn't need, there's no databases or files, there's no injections, there's no fancy PHP, there's no special session state variables being saved on your browser or any of that weird stuff. There's basic Java to make a pretty blue button. Basically is it, and that makes it very, very difficult for anyone to hack it or mess with it. And since it doesn't contain or retain any information, it doesn't really make any sense to hack it, because you're not going to get any information. Now, another computer that's behind on the thing is actually sniffing and collecting all the data for the unique IDs, the UUIDs, and your completion codes. And it's tracking the rate at which you're learning and all that. But that's going off to a whole other computer. And that computer cannot be connected to. It's doing that through sniffing. So it's only sniffing on the network. It doesn't have its own IP address. A connection can't be made to it, and it's actually a one-way. There's only a transmit pair of wires going to it, and no return pair. So it's what we call passive sniffer. So there's really no possibility of hacking into that machine or making any kind of connection to it, and that's where the only information that's recorded goes. So we're talking about a minuscule attack surface. It's probably about as close to totally and completely unhackable as any system you can, and most of that's simplicity. The PHP code that runs this is a single PHP file with about 4,000, between 4 and 5,000 bytes of PHP code. That's all it takes. So it's extremely small, it's extremely sweet, it's extremely simple, and it's very clean, well-documented code, and it's very easy to test it for everything. Now, as far as buffer overflows and all that, that would crash the pound server on the front end maybe, but it would never get through to this because the pound server only sends back the 5 or 8 exact explicit URLs, and so you've got a very secure system here, and when properly hosted, that's one of the reasons we don't give out the software for other people, because they'll go like throw it on a cheap crap web server with post capabilities and it'll get hacked, and then people will go, well, that wasn't unhackable. Well, probably wouldn't be if I let you touch it, but I don't. Okay, and it's just not very hackable. So if you're interested and you want me to host classes for you, whatever, I don't need to know the names of your students. I don't need any of that information, because this thing is simply going to hand them a code, and you'll have a place you can verify the code. Now, you'll want to know who your student is if you're a teacher, but I don't. I don't care, and I don't want to know. And this system, any information I'm ever given, I have to become responsible for. And somebody will come after it. Well, guess what? I don't get any information, and I don't keep any information. There's nothing for anyone to go after, and I don't have to worry about being responsible for it. You'll match up the tokens. You'll determine that your learners have actually read the material. And one of the things I like about this is that a learner who really starts using this, they learn real quick that they actually have to read every sentence. And that's not as painful as people think. It might cause a little bit of a headache because you're paying attention and a deeper concentration than the normal skimming and whatnot. But it trains the brain in a good way. And people that do a lot of textbooks on Edocio and documents will find that when they're reading other things elsewhere, they read better, paying more attention, and read more closely and understand better. So it does have a positive effect. There have been discussions, can somebody come up with a way to memorize the shapes of the sentences without actually reading them and somehow passing the Edocio? That's not any experience that I've had since 1981. Okay, and that's a little while ago. But I suppose it might be possible that this is something other than, but this system does not require a professor to create questions, because it never gives you any questions. All it shows you is 5 sentences and expects you to pick the one you just got done reading. And unlike multiple choice, where they show you 4 wrong answers and 1 right answer, and years later, since when you were in college, you saw 4 times as many wrong answers on tests as you saw right answers, you're actually more likely to do something wrong based on a wrong answer, because who in the hell can remember which test they got right? As the story goes, a guy who operated large cranes to lift stuff on tops of buildings did a balance equation wrong, because he remembered how to do it, but what he was remembering was a test answer that he'd gotten wrong. But he passed the test and he didn't know which particular answers he got right and which ones he got wrong. And so it was in his head. He used the bad equation. The crane toppled over, millions of dollars worth of damage, and he spent the rest of his days serving coffee at a Dunn Brothers in Stadium Village, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now, is that story true? Probably not, because I made it up. But the point being is if you're constantly reading wrong answers, you don't know where they're going to... So we don't show anybody any wrong answers. Every sentence you see is a sentence from the textbook. It's just 4 of them are from somewhere elsewhere in the textbook, not the page you just got done reading. So it's not that you won't have read the sentence. You may have already read it 10 pages ago, but you got to be paying enough attention to have an awareness of the page you just got done reading. And this trains the mind and trains the reading process for people to actually pay attention and keep learning hooks on each of the sentences they look at, so that short-term later they can prove that they read it. Now, you're not proving that you know anything, okay? We are assuming that if a professor wrote a textbook and prescribed that the textbook should be read, and if somebody reads it, they will learn what they need to learn, okay? We're not trying to modify that in any way, shape, or form. We are just confirming that you actually read it. That's it. Okay, now if the professor is a bad professor or a bad writer of textbooks, and somehow reading the textbook doesn't teach you something, we can't help that. We're not licensed professors, okay? All of these textbooks are written by professors, educational professionals, and we trust that they know how to write something so that if you read it, you will actually learn something. All we're trying to confirm is that you actually read it and that you're paying attention as you read. And for that, all we need is your short-term memory response of recognizing the sentence you just got done reading. And we trust that reading the textbook will have the long-term memory effect desired by the professor who wrote it. And that's not our role in the scenario. So let me know what you think. You can comment on this YouTube video. You can contact me. I'm, of course, Scott Provost at Gmail, SCOTTPROVOST at gmail.com. And I will host as many of these as you want for your institution or whatever, totally free of charge, not a problem. And probably won't be giving out the software. It won't be up somewhere to be downloaded or any of that stuff, because it only works perfectly or well under certain circumstances, and they're very inexpensive circumstances to provide. But I have it set up to provide that. Maybe at some stage later on, we can provide a complete multi-component system, maybe a version of Unhackable with the software on it. The Unhackable servers have like 5 or 6 BeagleBones and other servers inside of them, and there's the sniffers and all that, and maybe there'll be a hardware package that you can get that could actually run this in the way it should be run. But in the meanwhile, enjoy this course, because you're not being tested. Always click the third sentence and it'll take you to the next. The textbook here is one of our earlier textbooks that we offered. It's called God, Science, and Reason. It's not particularly religious. It was written by Wallace H. Provost Jr., who my understanding was that he was an atheist. Okay? At least as long as I knew him, he was an atheist. But he talks about how the birth of reason came about in Western culture, and how the technologies, atomic bombs, democracy, jet planes, and what he calls a rational God could come about starting from the Greek Ionian coast. Now, you may not agree with the content of the textbook, but a professor wrote it And what we will confirm is that people read it once we have the software engaged so that it is actually making you verify that you read it. Because Free Open University's introductory course is God, Science, and Reason. It discusses some 110 different philosophers, and each one of those philosophers, you're supposed to go Google search on them and get more information. But it is basically the introductory of training your mind to think, and it's also pretty good at teaching people and training you to do Edocios, because it is an interesting read. So just contact me, scottprovost@gmail.com, if you want Edocios hosted for you. Other than that, the software is not available, and the way it has to be run is a little bit complex. So I won't be putting it up for download or any of that. So let me know what you think, and I will be looking forward to your comments.